My name is Spence Havelick. I'm a professor emeritus at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Also served 23 years in the Boulder City Council, but for the purposes of this town and gown meeting, I am going to bring the perspective of a CU faculty member who has had quite a number of years of experience in the area of natural hazards. So I wanted to welcome everyone. Ruth Wright and I have been looking forward to this gathering, and we are pleased that you are here to see and hear why we believe that the annexation of CU South is fraught with many unanswered questions and several negative impacts that need to be addressed by the community and the Boulder City Council. What I propose to do here is to describe the site that CU seeks to develop as a branch campus. Then I will discuss the city-campus relationships from my perspective as an alumnus, a faculty member, and now as a professor emeritus. My major concerns about an annexation will focus on the thus far unknown and unexplained costs to the community and to the taxpayers of Boulder. The site that we're discussing tonight is located at the so-called gateway or southeastern corner of the city of Boulder. Today, dog walkers, bird watchers, cyclists, they cross the land, and when adequate snow is present, it is a popular place for cross-country skiers. Much of this 308 acre parcel is made up of abandoned gravel pits located in the historic floodplain of South Boulder Creek. The gravel mining operations over the years have extracted enough material that much of the mined land is about, I'd say, 15 to 18 feet below the normal level, historic level of Boulder Creek. And of course, it's very close to groundwater. A berm was constructed. You don't see it in this aerial view, but a berm was constructed to defer waters from entering the gravel mining operations. That berm has been since enlarged, and it is extending for 6,000 feet. It's actually an earthen levee, which tragically forced the major floodwaters of the 2013 flood northward, flooding the West Valley of Boulder, including about 1,900 homes and the Fraser Retirement Complex. Now, I should mention that the flooding of this property is a natural event. In 1938, floodwaters covered much of the land that CU wants for future growth. Climate scientists predict future and possibly more severe floods than the past will be forthcoming. One of the objectionable requests of CU is to diminish the size of the on-site detention pond by bringing in 360,000 cubic yards of fill in order to elevate about 129 acres of their property for future development and campus growth. That leads me to my second point, namely that CU versus city relationships have changed over the years. Early in my days as a faculty member, the university and the city were compatible. They were cooperative. But something has changed. I used to sing the alma mater, dear old CU. And in those days, we had good terms. But today, because of the administration of the university seeking to develop land that is very risky, the dear old CU isn't quite as dear anymore. A major project, so-called the South Campus, is so controversial that the neighbors in the region, Martin Park, Tantra, Majestic Heights, they are very concerned about what is going to happen to this site. As many people realize, the university as a sovereign entity does not need to abide by city guidelines, whether it be a height ordinance or a floodplain zoning. And so if annexation were to be granted, the community would have no control over what could happen on that South Campus. Another serious problem that is related to the campus city situation is that the city has been growing at 1 or 2% for a long time, but the university is growing at a much faster rate. So back in the days that it was a gravel pit, I don't think people thought much about that parcel of land. The university was focusing on something called the East Campus, which was purchased by the university in 1955. And then as the East Campus became more sought after by the campus, the idea of a research park was established. And the reason that there is a mention of the East Campus in my mind is that it is so much closer than this South Campus to the main campus. It is protected from many of the flood issues that we see in this photograph. By the way, this photograph does show you in green the tennis courts that will have to be also relocated. And you can also see, if you're close enough to this image, the berm that surrounds the eastern edge of the property. And you see US Highway 36 crisscrossing diagonally in the upper right-hand portion of this aerial photograph. One of the problems that the community needs to face is that the university has been proceeding with great haste, but the community and the city council has never been appraised exactly what the ultimate use of that land will be. A third issue that troubles me with the current stance of CU is the question of cost to the community. Whenever a municipality provides scarce resources such as water and sewer and fire protection, that municipality should expect and require net financial and physical benefits from the transaction. That contract, namely the annexation contract, should give citizens an objectively reviewed assessment of costs and benefits before the annexation is approved. This has not happened. Most important for the town to know would be the negative externalities that this branch campus will impose on the surrounding neighborhoods. There is sure to be more traffic, more air pollution, loss of this open space. In fact, there are threatened species that will be threatened even more with that development. There will be an increased carbon footprint. This is essentially a sprawl beyond Boulder's southern boundary. And we have had experience with the way the university has been treating this property. It was bulldozed to make way for the berm that was enlarged, as I mentioned a little earlier. And I guess one can hardly imagine what's going to happen to the endangered species or the wetlands that currently exist on that property. The cost to the city for landfill, it's something in the category of $15 million. And the costs are unknown of demolishing the old tennis club or tennis courts that are there. And then the cost to the city for a dam construction and other flood engineered works will run somewhere between $50 and $66 million. I am told that those are conservative estimates. Plus, you need to factor in inflation. Of course, the specific net benefits should be a part of the project evaluation. To date, these critical factors are not known. Can I fill in with a little background?
Just a minute.
Okay.
I was asleep at the switch.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying the evening, Alan.
Okay. Went to the stage where you said next slide.
Yes, And there it is, almost magically. If you and I and the crown and gown folks were in an airplane flying over Boulder, you'd see in the upper part of your screen the foothills. You'll see a lot of geologic activity that has happened over the last 8 or 9 or 10,000 years. You see how the erosion is chiseling away. And then, as indicated on the South Boulder Creek arrow, we have a drainage basin, a very significant one that Ruth will go into some detail about, 136 square miles. All of that drainage basin is being funneled down along the South Boulder Creek into the site. You'll see it, 308-acre abandoned gravel pit at that southeast corner of Boulder. The rest of the slide to the right is showing you the city and its city limits. And this is the parcel that is often called the gateway to Boulder as you come in off Highway 36, the old Boulder Turnpike. Well, the next slide will give those of you who haven't been there when the gravel mining was going on, get some idea of the magnitude of this gravel operation. This project, as I mentioned, took the sand and gravel from the alluvial plain and used it for construction around the region. And these operations dredged so low, almost to the groundwater. And so you have a very high groundwater condition on those gravel mining areas. Now, back in the days of the mining, the Flatiron Company provided a rather small berm which protected the mining operation from any flooding. I mean, the gravel company knew that this was an area that was subject to flood. And so a berm was constructed to prevent an overflow of South Boulder Creek into their gravel mining operations. But in 1981, there was a reclamation plan that was approved by the state and the county to restore this area to a set of ponds and wildlife refuge and habitat that was considered, it was sort of ideal open space, 42 acres of open water. However, when the university acquired this land, they had different plans, and they essentially negated the reclamation plan that was established and built a 6,000-foot levee to protect the property that CU had acquired so that they could eventually, I suspect, develop it. And so, and some of you may know the inside story of where some of that earth fill came from for the levee. I won't ask you the question, but I'll give you the answer. For those of you who remember when NOAA was constructed, the city council insisted that NOAA not rise higher than 55 feet, which is that legal limit. So NOAA, under a memorandum of understanding, was able to drop their building down, but in order to drop it down, they had to excavate from that site on South Broadway. And some of the fill came for this new levee on the South Campus. It came from that NOAA site. I suspect that's not widely known, but today we do have that 6,000-foot levee. It's an earthen levee. And in the eventual planning that the CU would like to do for this is to take that levee down, not breach it, but eliminate it, and use that material to create a dam, which Ruth will discuss a little bit later, to protect Boulder's eastern limits and West Valley, as it's called, from future flooding. Some of you realize that the city approached CU in order to acquire some of that acreage to construct a dam and other flood works to prevent future flooding. It's a little ironic because that levee that you see mentioned at the top of this slide, that levee forced the floodwaters in 2013 into the neighborhoods of East Boulder. So I think that we could probably go to the next slide, Al. That would be a good idea. And here you see, if you were an airplane flying over the site, you would see the site as it exists today. And I'm going to call your attention to the upper left-hand corner of the slide. You'll see a patch of bright green. And that gives you an idea of where the CU varsity tennis courts are located. And then just above that to the right, you'll see a pond, the dark spot. That's the favorite dog walkers pond. And then you'll see a line that goes around the whole site. You'll see the kind of loop thing to the right is the berm, the levee that is now protecting the land. And then to the right of that levee, you see the drainage of South Boulder Creek flowing from the lower part of your slide to the top, from south to north. Now you can see when that stream floods, it's going to push forward. But in the old days, if there hadn't been a levee there or a berm, that whole area would have become a very important flood detention basin. So some of the excess floodwaters could have been stored in that potential basin that you see rather ringed by that circular, it looks like a road, but it's actually a levee and a path, hiking path. So that's a little history of the site. There's been some changes. I think the next slide will illustrate a little bit of that change. This breaks my heart to see what the university has done to the wetland. They have bulldozed it. They have rearranged it in a way that I guess disregards the ecological principles that are at work in any ecosystem, any succession that might have been taking place over the years after the floods have receded. I would like to think that the city, once it annexed that land, would still have some control over what CU might do with that property. That, unfortunately, is not the case. As Ruth and I will discuss again a little bit later, if that annexation were ever to be approved, the city of Boulder would lose all of its ability to control any activity on that university land. It's a state entity, and they have their own rules or non-rules about how you deal with flood management, how you deal with the height ordinance, how you deal with kinds of housing, kinds of transportation. And as I mentioned a little earlier, there were good times that the campus got along with the city, even in the development of the research park, the so-called East Campus. That was a little troubling because, and I refuse to list the name of regions unless you ask me about them, but there were regions that were very unhappy about the city insisting that there be some flood mitigation on that 108-acre parcel on the East Campus, or the research campus. But Bear Creek and Skunk Creek flow into that area in conjunction with Boulder Creek. And today, there is some considerable land that one might consider as an alternative place for CU to continue whatever development she thinks she needs. The one problem that we have with this is that the city over time has had some decent relationships. The city has done some cost sharing on underpasses. We've had city council members and regions meeting together from time to time and administrators. But in recent years, we've entered some troubled waters. I think that's a fair statement to say. And of course, it's coming to a real unhappy situation today with the university insisting that they do certain things with that land that the city of Boulder may or may not have any control over. As I say, because it's a state entity, once they get annexed, there's very little hope that the city of Boulder could require a certain height or a certain type of housing. They may want to agree to it at this moment, but we have no legal bind we have no recourse, we have no leverage once it has fallen into the state hands. A third issue that troubles me with this proposed project, and we see it here in this slide, we do not know what the costs that are going to accrue to the city of Boulder as a result of this project. The 2013 flood did tell the university and the community what impact a flood does to our town. And the city of Boulder is very eager to find some, should we say, effective, cost-effective devices and mechanisms to prevent future flooding. This graphic map shows the power of that levee. The blue shows you the flood level during that 2013 flood, and you can see Highway 36 traversing the upper right-hand part of the map. But notice how that barrier, that looping barrier, which is called CU South Gravel Quarry, it's protected by that levee that runs more than a mile, and that land was kept relatively dry, but all the water that would have gone into that basin, that flood retention basin, detention basin, flowed northward into Boulder, into West Valley, into the Fraser community, into what we used to call the Indian Reservation. And 1,900 homes were impacted by that, of course, plus the retirement community at Fraser. The costs are a real puzzle to me. The negative costs that come to my mind include, should we say, the traffic that might be generated by this development. Again, I underscore the importance. We don't know what kind of development the university is proposing to put here. They say at first there might be 1,100 student units. We don't know if there's any research facilities. We don't know anything about any commercial leasing that they may take advantage of this site. But we know that there we are, several miles from the central campus. There are going to be traffic impacts. There's going to be noise. There's going to be, should we say, more air pollution, the loss of this open space that you and I saw in the first slide, the impact on threatened species, the increased carbon footprint. And this essentially is a branch campus creating sprawl beyond the current city limits of the city of Boulder. Now, there's another interesting cost feature. Ellen, could you just go back to that slide one more time? Maybe if you, oh, that's excellent, magic. Thank you, Ellen. There's a cost that some of you may not be aware of. The university has thus far refused to pay payment in lieu of taxes. When you annex, you expect property tax. When you annex a piece of state land, they don't pay taxes, and CU administrators have refused to offer payment in lieu of taxes. So there is a total net benefit in real dollars to the city that they propose, but we don't know what those numbers are. And we don't know the full cost of making this project safe from future flooding. There are some estimates. One is to bring in landfill up to $15 million. And I should mention that that landfill is to elevate or raise 129 acres on that CU property so CU can do its development on that elevated parcel and the other part of the lot of the land that is not in that flood zone. We don't know what they're going to do with that 129 acres. But the city does need between 80 and 110 acres to do their flood works. A dam around the north part of that parcel that Ruth will show us in a little while, and a levee along the creek, but the levee will be destroyed. It'll be moved, and that earth will be used to build a dam to the north to try to protect future residents in Boulder. So the trade-off, the city needs the flood protection. The university needs to have water and sewer to develop their campus. And at the moment, the cost for doing these things are not well known. Even the flood works, somewhere between $50 and $66 million, which have to be paid by the city. Now that also includes taking down there's an old-fashioned tennis club that has to be dealt with. The tennis courts the varsity has to be dealt with because that's in the potential area. And here's another point that I'm probably wanting to make extra clear. When the university is proposing to bring landfill in, earth fill, by the way, it's 360,000 cubic yards. You have any idea what 360,000 cubic? That's 52 city blocks. And they're elevating it to the 500-year level. That's the maximum protection that we're speaking of. And yet the university is lobbying for the 100-year flood level. Again, Ruth is going to go into detail in a minute or two about this. But the irony to me is, here the university is filling in land which otherwise could be a detention area. It seems counterproductive to me. But I'm certainly open to hearing another side of the question and would love to learn if I'm a little off base. But at the moment, it looks like a very unfortunate bargain that the city is going to be holding the bag, and the university, if it's annexed, is going to be walking away almost scot-free. Now, they will tell us that they're going to provide some housing for students. They're going to tell us that it's going to be an attractive place and that there'll be a walking trail for dogs. But it's not going to be the kind of place that we see today. Lots of changes with a number of costs that are unknown. Alan, the next slide, perhaps. I want to show you that the city does some really interesting things in the South Boulder Flood Creek. Hogan Pancross. If some of you watched that debate over several years, several developers came to town and wanted to put 137 housing units in that parcel that you see. Finally, in 2018, after a lot of debate and a lot of neighborhood protests, the Hogan Pancross property was purchased by the city for $5 million, 22 acres, just to the east, or in this slide, just to the left of South Boulder Creek. And I hold this as an example of truly good land use planning and good flood mitigation efforts, because this land was purchased for two reasons. Number one, to prevent a flawed development, a development that the neighbors did not want, did not need. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the city justified this purchase as a flood mitigation project to help absorb some of the floodwaters from South Boulder Creek. Only 22 acres, a small parcel, but a token of good flood mitigation thinking and planning. Next slide, please, Alan. So at this point, what we really need is an objective analysis. This means an analysis not done by CU or not done by the city planning folks, but an outside arrangement, consultancy, to do the total cost to the Boulder taxpayers. This has not been done to my knowledge, or if it has been done, it's not been made public. Secondly, the physical and monetary costs for this increased traffic need to be quantified. The cost of the noise, the pollution, the loss of open space and endangered species, all of these factors, including the cost of sprawl, has not been quantified. And I don't think an annexation should proceed until these costs are known. We don't know the short-term or the long-term costs to the city of providing services of fire protection, water and sewer, open space management, and many other things that the university would benefit as a result of this transaction. City of Boulder, at this moment, in my thinking, my judgment, should terminate any discussion of a branch south campus. Next slide, Alan. So again, this is so important, I think we need to reemphasize it. The short and long-term costs to the city, the analysis of whatever CU has up her sleeve as to what that development should be. At the moment, they say they will not tell us what the site plan or the master plan is until they become annexed. That seems a very odd situation to me, a rather unfair balance. So does CU want to continue to grow at its 5% per month or per year? As you know, the city of Boulder, through a very laborious process, has come up with a growth management plan. We started out at 10% growth, 10% affordable housing per year at 1% growth. And then over time, we arrived at a 2% growth per year with 20% permanently affordable housing. So here we have the city growing at 2% in terms of residential units, and the university growing at 5%. We don't have any good handle on the technical feasibility of these plans. Either it be the traffic plan for the campus, how they're going to get people back and forth. They talk about a transportation hub on their gravel pit campus. We all know the behavior of students at CU. I don't care how fancy the hub is, they're still going to be using their cars. They're going to be biking. They're going to be using the bus, hopefully. But the other thing that it's a little bit of a problem for me, the university says they'll lease or sell 2 acres for a firehouse. As you know, there is a fire station number 4 on Darley. And I think the university expects the city to be coaxed into having a fire station in the middle of their gravel pit campus. Now that seems like a very bad deal, because guess who pays for the fire protection? Mainly the city of Boulder. I mean, the university does have a cost sharing plan, but these are the costs that we need to see in a transparent way. The carbon footprint needs to be I mean, all of us know that climate change is coming. There will be floods greater than the ones that we've seen, we think, in the past. And so is the 100-year flood variant a safe protection for the city of Boulder? Well, I think that I am really displeased. I guess that's a gentle word to say, displeased for what we are learning from CU. And the city has certainly not been transparent with whatever costs they are computing in terms of what the city will have to pay, whether it be to stormwater fees or increased tax. I just don't think this annexation should proceed with what little we know about it. Again, no rational person or institution would ever propose a development on a high-risk floodplain or an avalanche runout zone. I want to turn the podium over to my distinguished colleague and friend, Ruth Wright.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ruth Wright, and I'm going to start out a little with the personal history of myself's involvement. What you see before you is a very scary diagram of South Boulder Creek. And it shows that the total basin is 136 square miles and another 43 square miles. And the distance is over 100 miles. So this is the basin, and it goes all the way to the right straight towards CU South. In any case, Boulder's incomparable natural setting brought Ken and myself to Boulder in the late 50s. I was inspired to protect it and became chair of Plan Boulder, the local environmental group, in 1965. Accomplishments were the sales tax for open space and adding the 55-foot building height limit to the city charter, both supported by votes of the citizens. In the early 2000s, the city hired consulting engineer Taggart to develop a solution of the flooding in the South Boulder Creek. And this particular slide is from his report. At the same time, the city asked me to join city manager Frank Bruno to negotiate with the University of Colorado. The purpose was to limit the property it calls Cusouth to uses which are compatible with the floodplain. This was rejected by CU, but to some degree, from that time on, I've been involved with Cusouth. My single goal has always been to protect the people living in the West Valley, the large area downstream of Highway 36. I graduated from CU Law School in 1972, and I'm a strong supporter of my alma mater, University of Colorado. The only issue, and admittedly it's a big one, is CU's insistence on the use of the depleted gravel out pit and floodplain at the foot of a huge drainage basin, as shown on the picture, as a campus. Next slide, please. This gives us more of a close-up as to what's going on with floodwaters. This slide has been shown to you by Spence, but I just want to reiterate that the line that goes from the right to left in an angle is obviously Highway 36. Then below that, we have CU South. Above that, we have the West Valley, and you can see all the flooding that has occurred in various times. On the left-hand side, you can see the red is high hazard, but then there's still the conveyance zone, which shows as green, and then there's city floodplain in 100 year and 500 year. Next slide, please. This particular letter, February 7th, 1996, is a letter from the CU's attorney stating that an appraisal shall indicate a value of $16 million. Shall indicate. In other words, you see the red underlining? They are telling the appraiser that he shall indicate an appraised value of a minimum of 16 million. And the appraiser appraised the value at 16 million. Actually, this is unethical from both sides. You do not tell an appraiser what number he should use when you hire him, and the appraiser should certainly not accede to CU's request. In any case, the reason they wanted the 16 million, it was a scheme. CU worked on a scheme with Flatirons Paving, the owner of the property. As you all know, that's the one who graveled it. The scheme was to appraise it at 16 million, then to be able to tell the regents of the university that Flatirons Paving was willing to sell it for 11 million, and in turn to receive a charitable contribution from the IRS for the 5 million. That was going to make it look like a bargain to the regents of the university, and they bought it. Jim Crane, let's do the next slide. It says city appraisal 7 million lower. Well, this is what happened. Jim Crane, our open space director, received a more realistic appraisal for 9 million. But of course, he did not compete with CU. But people have asked why Jim Crane didn't buy the property. Then we would have it for open space. We would have had a project a long time ago because the city could cooperate with the city. And so we would be all set. But I wanted to show you that it finally came out with the Colorado Daily in 1996 that the city's appraisal was $17 million lower than what Flatirons was, but I bet that the city was, CU was, but of course CU bid it, bought it, and we're stuck with that. Next slide, please. This brings us to 2013. Fast forward, the disastrous flood resulting not from a surge of water plunging down the valley, but from many days of local rain saturating the soil in the South Boulder Creek Valley until it could hold no more. The land could hold no more. It was saturated. So the water was backing up against Highway 36 and eventually overtopped the highway at night, flooding into the West Valley with disastrous results, including Fraser Meadows Retirement Home, where some patients were evacuated by carrying them through hip-deep floodwaters. Flood control project solution was desperately needed. So, next slide. Here we have CU South, and we've already seen this. It shows the tennis courts. Most importantly for me, however, is that it shows water in little ponds. Now, water in little ponds means that that's the height of the groundwater. There's no stream connected here to put water there. So we have a high groundwater level. This is a picture from the report, the engineering report. So the engineers knew all about this. Anyway, so again, the city hired a consulting firm. At a community meeting presenting their 2015 report, I approached Kurt Bauer, having heard that he was the project engineer. He agreed to meet me after the Christmas holidays. But when I called him, he told me he was no longer the project engineer. Yet 2 weeks later, he testified to the county commissioners as the project engineer. Okay, I was on my own. I think you can go to number 20 at this point. The next one, please. A study of the lengthy report that the new consulting firm had prepared was the engineering solution. It was to build a detention pond upstream of the highway, which could detain floodwaters and then release them in a controlled manner through the West Valley. And that's the way it should be done, because you contain the floodwaters on the upstream side of the highway, and then in a controlled manner, you release them through the West Valley. So that is the concept, and it's a good concept. So a lengthy report showed that the engineering study was to build a detention pond upstream of the highway, which would detain the floodwaters and then release them in a controlled manner to the West Valley, through the West Valley, and recommended option D. So let's look at option D. So you see the highway 36 from the lower to the upper end, and then the red area is the flood wall going all the way along, and then actually right directly along to the highway. The detention storage, which is the blue area, and it is not cross-hatched, but there's lines through it, which shows that it is being excavated. So that whole area was excavated, and then that was used to fill the acreage above it in yellow, 31 acres. Now the problem with it, though, is that we know from the last slide that there's groundwater, and it's at the surface level. So if you do excavations over the years, that detention area, which shows in blue, is going to be already filled with waters up to the level of the surface. So there's not going to be any room for water coming into that because it's already filled with groundwater. Another problem with this plan is that in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the flood wall. Well, if you can look just above that and to the left, it shows a little bit of a blue line. That's Valley Lake and the Valley Lake channel. So it hits the, it doesn't go through. And when that was pointed out, the consulting engineer says, oh, that's right. Well, we'll just build a siphon from that point where it hits the flood wall underneath the project and the dam, and then release it to the other side. This is a siphon which goes down even further and comes back up. It's very prone to be obstructed, very prone to be filled with sediment. In any way, it just doesn't work, and everybody realized that. The other problem is that the flood wall runs right along Highway 36. So if the detention pond is full, and in fact, the water flows over it, it flows over Highway 36, over just Highway 36. Right on down, as you know, Highway 36 is at an angle down to the city. So imagine the water flowing down Highway 36, which is towards the upper end of the photo, and spilling over into the West Valley. Of course, that's the West Valley with Fraser Meadows, which we are trying to protect. So it was obvious that option D didn't work. So when we look at option D and it doesn't work, I testified at several public meetings, and nobody really listened until I gave the city a check to say, okay, here's a check, and I want you to use it to run option D through the computer, because option D is computer generated. So run it through the computer and see how it works. I immediately got the check back, but no action. So two of the members of the city council went to see the utilities director and said, we think Ruth Wright's suggestion is a pretty good one. Let's run option D through the computer. Well, what did the utilities director say right there on the spot? We don't need to run it through the computer. We know that option D does not work. So the question is, how long would they have continued with designing the project, knowing it didn't work, with starting to build a project, knowing it didn't work? At that time, it was a $22 million project. When would they have had to admit that it didn't work and stop spending taxpayers' dollars? Next slide, please. Here we have a chart which compares option 1, which is the 100-year, and option 2 was the 500-year of two of the options that were proposed. But I want you to look just at the regional flood detention cost. And they are pointed to with a nice blue arrows somebody put on the slide. The regional flood detention, option 1, 100 year, $40 million. The 500-year, $47 million. That's only a difference of $6 million, and has enormous impacts and can protect the West Valley to a much, much higher degree. There's another chart I have, which I didn't get in time to do a slide, and it shows that, no, this one's okay. This one here is, it shows the benefits, the downstream benefits between the 100-year and the 500-year. The downstream benefits, the 100-year protects 2,300 people. The 500-year protects 4,100 year. Structures protected in the 100-year are 260. In the 500-year protection, there's 730. The dwelling units protected under the 100-year, 1,100. Under the 500-year, 1,900. This is very, very cost effective. So I just want to point that out because the criteria is so important. I want to explain what we mean by 100-year and 500-year, but we can leave this on the screen. Or let's see, should we go to 20? Let's see, should we go to 20? No, let's not go to 20. So after knowing that the option D didn't work, it was back to the drawing boards. But I want to explain the criteria. Engineers have to use numbers to do their work. So to calculate flood flows, they use criteria such as 100-year and 500-year level of flows, flood flows. They get these numbers from weather data, etc. It sounds weird, 500-year and 100-year, but it's really simple. They're actually percentages. The 100-year really means that this flood has a 1% chance of occurring in any year. The 500-year means that this flood has a 0.2% chance of occurring in any year. So statistically, the 500-year is much less likely to happen. And using the terms 100-year and 500-year are just easy shortcuts, words of these concepts. So whenever you hear 100-year, that's really the 1% flood, meaning it can happen every year, anytime, 1% chance. So, and the 500 is much less because it's 0.02%. So those are the differences between the 100-year and 500-year. And if you look at the costs, you can see the cost for the detention is only $6 million difference. So it comes down to a policy decision. I strongly support the 500-year protection. When folks moved to the West Valley, there were no floodplain regulations. No land was kept open for floodwaters to move through without damage to lives or property. At that time, government, which happened to be the county, floodplain zoning and regulations is much more, is a modern concept, or it's an old concept, but really hasn't been accepted by local governments and still isn't being accepted, except for here. Boulder County and the city of Boulder know about the 100-year and 100-year, the flood year, and they know about flood protection. But it wasn't that far along when we didn't know it at all. So it comes to a policy decision. There were no floodplain regulations, and floodwaters could go through without damage to life and property. And when government failed them, at that time, now government should protect them. In addition to that, we also have to contend with the climate change that we all know is coming. So the 500-year gives a little more safety, a little more insurance that we might be able to take care of the climate change perhaps a little better. Next slide, please. So here's what CU was doing. This was a letter, and let's see, do we have a date on it? Not on this one, okay. Have been blocking the 500-year for all of this time. And this is a letter from Draper, who is the DU's Vice Chancellor for Strategic Relations, to the Boulder City Council. And the red says, because they, due to the March 28th response, we did not offer the university a feasible path forward. The additional acreage the city is asking under variant 1-500. We are informing the city that any further expenditure for the development of preliminary designs for variant 1-500 should cease. And then a little lower, it talks about the 129 acres. So CU has been really quite selfish on this. It, despite what I've shown and what city knows, and the fact that no city funds will be used for the project, the city still vehemently resists the 500-year flood level of protection, which seems to me as an institution of higher learning and as a state institution is unacceptable. Why do they do this? Because it may require a larger footprint for the detention pond, resulting in less land development. And you remember why we have option D to begin with and why it doesn't work is because CU said, we want a small footprint for the project, and so because we want to develop. In these decisions, CU has never shown any concern for the folks living in the West Valley and what may be best for them, which is very disappointing. Next slide. So this is the current flood control project. And it is a 100-year project because CU doesn't want a 500-year project. And now CU is pressing for an annexation agreement. And the city is busily trying to accommodate them. Why now? CU readily admits it has no present land use sites for CU South. And the city is still working on a project concept, which is this one that you see in front of you, which eventually requires approval from the Department of Transportation, the safety engineer, and potentially others. We do not even know what specific land on CU may be required. It would be foolhardy to limit our options at this time. You can see here that it still has detention excavation. However, since we showed them that the excavation in the original option D would simply fill with water during that time, there now is, believe it or not, a concrete wall all around the entire portion of the excavation detention, going down to bedrock. A concrete wall all around the area you see as detention excavation at some incredible cost, which we don't know yet. So an annexation agreement is way premature. It's difficult to write a negative contract, that is, one which lists things you cannot do. If you miss just one important point, you have failed. At present, we have no idea what the future might bring, what a future administration may want many years from now that we have not prevented. This is in perpetuity. As of right now, Boulder and CU are on equal footing for negotiations. However, once annexed, city regulations no longer control CU. I have to repeat that because my predecessor said it, but we really, we're in this position right now where the city is actively, and so is the city council, actively negotiating an annexation agreement with CU. CU doesn't need it now. They don't even have a site plan. And if we give this up, then we don't have any control. As of right now, Boulder and CU are on equal footing for negotiations. We are a home rule city and they are a state entity. And I checked this with a professor at CU. Right now we're equals in this negotiation. As soon as we annex, we are no longer equals. As a state entity, CU is in charge. Our regulations no longer control. Then we are at CU's mercy. And as regards CU South, CU has not shown much mercy lately. So here's my conclusion, and I want the next slide. No annexation without total understanding of the public. Having heard this story, Alan, Spence, and I are making this appeal to you, our audience, to take action now. Call or email the members of the City Council and the Planning Board to stop working on an annexation agreement because it's way too premature. We need the total cost to the taxpayers of Boulder. Will city have to bond to pay for the project? What funds will be paid to repay the bonds? The city does not have an approved project from CDOT, that's the Colorado Department of Transportation, state safety engineer, and others. We don't even know where the location of the project will be on CU South. This makes a bad situation irreversible. So folks, in the audience, please follow this. You're the only ones that can do it. The city council and the planning board at the city administration are working right now on an annexation agreement. You can pull it up and take a look at it. It goes on for pages and pages and pages, but it's irreversible if it doesn't include everything that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, we are ready for questions now. And I hope that Kim Malville has been looking at the chat and maybe he's got some information for us to for some of the questions for Spence and Ruth.
Well, we don't have any questions yet, so let me, in a very ecumenical fashion, create my own. So Ruth, what exactly is the 500-year plan? It seems that for a neophyte like me, the map indicates that the best way to divert the water is simply to breach the berm on the south side, on its south end, so water can flow directly over into the previous detention pit without any problems at all. And one can use that whole area as a large water holding device. The idea of bringing fill dirt into to raise the tennis courts is just absurd. To take a natural area that could function as a detention pond and reduce its capacity is crazy. And in fact, what could be better use of the bottom of a detention pond than a tennis court? There's no buildings, there's no people there, there's no animals. If it's flooded, so be it, but afterwards one can scrape off some mud and still use it as a tennis court. I don't know why one needs to protect a tennis court, but anyhow, so my first question is, what's wrong with breaching the berm on the south side so that water can just naturally flow into the detention pond that we have right now?
Well, a part of the plan is, in fact, to remove the berm, and it doesn't do much, quite frankly. You can remove the berm, and the floodwaters will still back up against Highway 36 and overflow to the highway and then go into the West Valley. It doesn't do the job just removing the berm.
So what is the 500-year plan then?
Well, the 5-year plan is actually, if we were pushing for, and a lot of citizens spoke to this, is doing something, let's say the 100-year plan, but in addition to that, doing something further upstream with various land use changes so that there are floods that can be stopped at certain points, and then it overflows, and then it goes to the next berm that gets built up, and then the next berm before it ever gets to the big project. And that would add enough to at least go to the 500-year. That's been proposed. CU has absolutely forbidden the use of their property to do that. And quite frankly, the city and the consultants have been totally blocking that particular option from the very beginning.
So we have a question from Crystal Gray, who has just left the screen, but she will be back in a minute. She wants to know, what about tribal consultations in terms of proper use of the land?
Well, I don't know what tribal consultations we find, but what is the tribe going to do? Are they going to object to the project and then add them to us against the project?
I think Crystal may be remembering how we got 13 tribal nations to come to the NOAA site and push that building from the Broadway sidewalk far west beyond the Anderson Ditch. And they came down to discover that they had a medicine wheel on that NOAA property. And maybe Crystal is wondering if there are any Indian vestiges on these 308 acres. I haven't heard that question raised, and I'm sure CU would not be interested in raising it, but maybe the Native American Rights Fund or other tribal leaders might have some insight to that. It would have to go back before the gravel mining days, and maybe, I don't know, it's a curious question. I think to this point, Crystal, no one has really raised that. And if it had been raised, the Flatirons folks must have put it to rest.
But it's worth a try. But the real thing that bothers most of us is that the area which is on the upstream side of Highway 36, right next to South Boulder Creek, where it goes underneath the highway, is the finest open space natural area that we have in our entire open space program. And it has been accepted by the state as such. And yet a flood wall is going to be built on it. So there's, that may be one of the state entities that needs to get involved. When I said the CDOT and state engineer, and I said and others, I was thinking specifically of the state agency that has the authority, at least maybe has the authority to prevent that from happening on this very, very special open space areas with the trusses and the jumping mouse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So Spence, you mentioned the medicine wheel that had some effect upon the NOAA building. I was called into that as a archaeoastronomer, and we looked at the medicine wheel claims, and that was absolutely wrong. There was no evidence whatsoever.
Oh.
And Bill Bradley, as a geologist, looked at that and said it was all railroad debris. So unfortunately, that's not a good example for tribal consultations. But I wonder if Crystal knows of any particular.
Yeah, she must have something up her
There
sleeve.
she is, Crystal.
You're on.
I was trying to answer. We were trying to answer your question.
Hi.
About the
So
tribes.
I'm sure you all read that the city is in consultation with the tribes regarding land acknowledgements and Settlers Park. So that got me to thinking of several other situations where the city has consulted with tribal representatives. And one is the Valmont Butte site, when the city wanted to put a compost facility just to the east of it. And it was about 2004. Tom Eldridge and I were the city council representatives to this big old committee. Some of you might have even been on it. And the committee, and it was informed by tribal representatives. It wasn't one of these big formal consultations, but we all recommended to the city council that they not go forward with the Public Works composting facility. So I was thinking about the similarities between Settlers Park and Boulder Creek. It's a big high point looking down on Boulder Creek, and the similarities between Valmont Butte looking down on Boulder Creek. And then you've got CU South, and you've got the high points off Chambers Road looking down on to South Boulder Creek. And I thought, since the city is involved with these land acknowledgements, that they should have the same process for CU South. We don't own the land, but we will certainly be impacting it. But more importantly, CU should enter into talks. I mean, if we're going to all walk our talk about acknowledging peoples that were here before us. And the most important thing when you read about this is, what are the actions? So when you think about CU South, with that in mind, you think, what are the actions that could be taken? Is it build some academic buildings and tennis courts and things like that? I mean, I just throw that out, and I'd like to have that viewpoint, representative and represented. And all of you have a lot more experience and academic knowledge, or that can contribute to the discussion, I should say. But you do have more academic knowledge and experience than I do.
What just happened?
That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, I just lost you. Well, I was certainly,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Spence and I we're really into this other aspect of it. And if there's somebody out there that can ask CU to look into that, or you can ask the city